Hi, I'm Kim from Parnassus Studio, where we teach the engineering of musical instruments and how to play them better. In today's lesson, we'll learn how a piano works, and I will show you 3 secrets inside your piano. The piano is considered a percussive instrument. When you hit a key, there's a hammer inside that strikes the strings. It is the action that transfers the force on the keys to the strings. And we'll be looking at how the action works, which directly influences the quality of tone. I have the cover of my upright piano off, and you can see all the mechanisms inside. Grand pianos have a slightly different action mechanism, but they operate on similar principles. This is a side view of a piano key and the attached mechanisms. We'll be focusing on 3 parts. First, the key, second, the jack, and third, the hammer. These parts are actually not attached by a screw or a joint, but instead they're actually just resting on each other. The key is a lever, and when you press it, it pushes on the whip band first. Then the whip band pushes the jack. When the jack moves far enough, the hammer strikes the string. Here's a view of the actual piano action. It is shown in slow motion, and you can see that the mechanisms move up when I press the key. Here I'm raising the whip band, which is above the key. And you can see here that the key is actually not connected to the whip band at all. There's no joint or a screw, anything like that. So the whip band and the rest of the mechanisms are actually just resting on the top of the keys. Now we have moved up a little bit, and we are looking at the hammer resting on the jack. What you're seeing here is that I am holding up the hammer with the pen and showing you that there's also a gap here between the hammer and the jack. There's no joint holding those 2 pieces together. And as I'm pressing the key, you can see the jack moving up and down, and it's literally pushing against the hammer. This is why the piano is considered a percussive instrument. When you activate a key, you're literally tossing the hammer at the strings. Here's a close-up view of the hammer and jack. As I press the key, the jack essentially flings the hammer forward, which strikes the string. One of the biggest differences between an upright and on a grand piano is what's called the escapement. In order to show what the escapement is, I'm showing a side view of the hammer and also a top view. These are actually 2 different hammers for filming purposes. Some editing magic was used here in order to get the timing right between the 2 clips. When you press a key, it pushes on the jack, which then pushes on the hammer. After the jack pushes the hammer needs to get out of the way so that the strings can freely vibrate. Otherwise, if the hammer stays on the strings, it'll end up muting them. The escapement is what allows the jack to be in a position such that when the hammer bounces back, it can stop away from the strings. The hammer bounce happens while you're depressing the key and not when you have released the key. When the hammer bounces back while the key is still depressed, it does not return to its starting position, but rather it stays near the strings. When you release the key, you are resetting the action. The hammer fully retracts and the jack moves to the very bottom of the hammer. Most upright pianos have single escapement, meaning that the key has to be released almost fully in order for the action to reset. Grand pianos have double escapement, where the key has to release only partially in order for the action to reset partially. This allows you to play faster with more accuracy. There is a very important concept related to the percussive nature of the hammer. Once the hammer has been thrown at the strings, bounced back, and stopped, No amount of continuing to press on the key will change the sound. What this means is that after you have played a note, you want to relax your hands and your body for tension-free playing. You can keep the key depressed in a passive, restful state, but you do not need to keep pressing on it actively. Also, due to the percussive nature of the action, in some ways it's better to think of pushing or tossing your hands on the keys instead of pressing. Pressing has the connotation to hold something down. So keeping the pressure on the key after the hammer has left the jack causes tension in the body and also poor tone. Ultimately, you're controlling the velocity of the hammer, which determines the quality of tone and also the volume. You will notice that if you play a key too slowly, you will not make any sound. In this case, you did not supply the action with sufficient energy for the hammer to reach the strings. It's as if you did not throw the ball far enough. When you practice, think about that interface between the jack and the hammer, and try to control how fast the jack pushes on the hammer. Now that we have seen how the action works and why we need to control the velocity of the hammer, we want to know how to control that. In this section, we're going to look at the varying touch weights of the keys and how they relate to the velocity of the hammer. Piano keys are essentially levers mounted on a fulcrum. Because the black keys are shorter, they're lighter and also closer to the fulcrum. These factors make the black keys harder to play than the white keys. It may be easier to play softly on the black keys as a result, but if you want to play a little louder, use a little bit of more weight from your body. Because piano keys are levers, they will feel heavier the further away from you play. If you play closest to you on the tip of the keys, it'll feel the easiest as you're maximizing the leverage. If you want a big, powerful sound, you can try playing near the tip of the keys closest to you, using your arm weight and even your upper body weight. On the other hand, one strategy for playing quietly is playing on the key areas away from you, as this will naturally reduce the hammer velocity. Now let's discuss the weights of the hammers. The weights of the hammers are graduated all throughout the piano. If you look closely, the hammer heads become smaller as you go from the lower register on the left to the higher register on the right. The action mechanisms are the same for all keys. The lower register strings are much bigger and require more energy to resonate properly, which is why the hammer needs to have more mass. Because of the hammer weight differences, you will notice that it takes more effort to play the lower register keys than the higher ones. There are counterbalanced lead weights embedded in the lower register keys to alleviate this problem. The weights might help during slow playing, but not during fast playing. The reason is that the counterweights increase the inertia of the keys. The increased inertia takes more energy to move the keys, and the faster you want to move the keys, the more energy is required. In general, when you're playing lower register keys, you do need to push into the keys with a little bit of more weight from your hands, fingers, arms, and the upper body. In summary, due to the key levers and the varying weights of the hammers, the low register black keys will have the heaviest touch weight, and the high register white keys will have the lightest. Now let's discuss the dampers. When you depress a key, the damper attached to that key also lifts, which allows the strings to vibrate. When you release the key, the damper goes down, muting all the strings. If you're playing a section where you want the sound to continue, you can hold the key down, which will allow the strings to continue to vibrate. Here is an example of where the damper cuts off the sound when the key is released. The rightmost pedal of the piano is called the sustain pedal. When you depress this pedal, all the dampers rise, allowing all strings to freely vibrate. One more thing about the dampers is that when the sustain pedal is engaged, the keys will feel lighter. The reason is that when the pedal is not engaged, you're using part of the key press to lift the damper off the strings. But when you use the pedal, your foot has done the work of lifting the dampers off the strings. Even though there's nothing you can do to change the sound once the hammer has hit the strings and bounced back, there is one thing you can change. Using the dampers, you can decide when to stop the sound or blend different sounds from different keys. The very high register keys actually do not have any dampers. The high-pitched notes decay rather quickly compared to the low ones, and the manufacturers have determined the dampers were unnecessary. However, you may notice a subtle discontinuity in the sound if you play a note with the damper immediately followed by one without. And here is an example. One thing to note here is that each damper is muting 3 strings. In fact, most of the keys are associated with 3 strings each. This is why when you have a very out-of-tune piano, it can sound wobbly and very strange, as there can be up to 3 strings at different pitches ringing together. The lower register notes on the piano have either 2 strings or just 1. You may be wondering what this all means for a digital piano. The actions of digital pianos are usually simplified versions of the acoustic action. Since digital pianos do not have any strings, you do not need real hammers. However, more advanced digital pianos mimic the varying touch weights of acoustic pianos by using progressive resistance or weights in place of hammers. Typically, there are dual sensors attached to each key to measure the velocity of the key. Then, the velocity is used as an input to the signal processor of the digital piano, which produces a sound output. The most advanced digital pianos even simulate the key escapement. They use a third sensor to detect when a key is released and allow you to play that key again even before it is fully released, similar to grand piano's double escapement. In summary, you do need to control the speed of the keys when you play a digital piano in order to produce a musical sound. I'm going to give you some tips on playing based on the secrets we have learned today. For melodic pieces, you want to create a very smooth legato sound. In order to do that, you can play as if you're pushing into the keys instead of dropping the hand and the arms too much. Essentially, you want to control the speed of the hammer so it's not hitting the string too fast. Green's Arietta is an example of melodic playing, and this is what it sounds like. There are pieces where we want to make notes sound very short, sometimes with staccatos. In that case, you want to make the hammer move very quickly. That's very different from legato playing. In order to move the hammers quickly, what you can do is drop your hands onto the keys. It's almost like a tossing sensation. Depending on how heavy you want it to sound, you can just toss the fingers or the hands. Or even the arms. But in this case, I'm going to demonstrate light staccato, short and light T playing, and it's from Bartók's Romanian dances. We have learned today that the piano has many moving parts, which are also disconnected. The key to creating a beautiful sound is really controlling the speed of the hammer. If you have any questions, please post below. Thanks for watching.